Racism touches a raw nerve in every city and in each and every one of us. In Toronto, a remarkable 120 cultures exist side by side, and over 100 languages are spoken here.
They ended up putting me on the floor and kicking me and putting guns to my face and saying that we think we're so tough because we speak.
In a world where racism is such a constant presence, how can a city like Toronto hold together?
There's always going to be racism, and there's no question in my mind that is true.
In 1933, racism ignited the worst riot in Toronto's history.
The surprising thing to me about the swastika riots was the number of people that came out of their houses with bats and sticks because they were after the Jews.
What can we learn from a race riot that tore apart a peaceful city over 60 years ago?
Happened on my 20th birthday, and what I saw that night I couldn't believe I was looking at. People who I never thought would be involved in such a thing had baseball bats and pieces of iron pipe and were hitting anybody that looked like a Jew on the head.
Eyewitnesses vividly remember the Christie Pitts riot. Most of the rioters were the same age as these young people, but they find it hard to believe it could have happened in the multiracial city they know.
That's how I happened to get to Christie Pits, because I was a police reporter at the Star at night.
Thousands of people rampaged through Christie Pitts Park, and running battles were fought on neighboring streets from dusk until the early hours of the morning. Just a few months after Hitler assumed power, people were displaying swastikas in Toronto. This is a largely forgotten episode in the city's history. How could a riot of such magnitude, inspired by the Nazi symbol, have happened here in 1933, when Toronto was the most British of cities? The Dominion of Canada was a patriotic backwater of the British Empire. Toronto, with 630,000 citizens, was the country's second largest city. It was intensely loyalist, as the Chief of Police, Brigadier General Draper, affirmed.
The first requisite of good citizenship in this country, namely loyalty to the British Empire. The next requisite of good citizenship in this country is being a good Canadian.
80% of the population were of British descent.
It was very much a British city. There was no question about it. The whole attitude in the schools, everything you were taught had to do with Britain.
We went to school and we sang God Save the King, and we also were taught that the sun never did set on the British Empire.
The British and Protestant heritage of the majority cast the city's character in iron.
I do not know if some of you are aware of this or not, but in the outlying districts, this city is often referred to as Toronto the Good.
Toronto the Good was named in that way simply because they pulled the sidewalks in at 9 o'clock at night, and you couldn't go to a sporting event on Sunday, and the churches did a booming business, and you just couldn't get a drink of beer or wine or liquor anywhere. The Temperance Act was in force, and if someone wanted to go to a cemetery, they say, go to Toronto.
The Puritanism of the city was such that, on Sundays, the swings in parks were padlocked because public frivolity was prohibited on the Sabbath. Toronto's rigid atmosphere was dictated by the Protestant Brotherhood of the Orange Order, founded in 17th century Ireland to uphold the British monarchy against Catholic forces. In 1933, typically, speechmakers at the Orange Day Parade stirred up anti-Catholic sentiment and attacked any non-British influence.
Toronto was Orange Order all the way. And the Orange Order was a very, very discriminating organization. They hated Catholics, for instance. I mean, that goes without saying.
The mayor of Toronto was William Stewart, a mild-mannered undertaker and an Orangeman. He tried to temper the intense partisanship the parade often sparked.
Today, not assembled to perpetrate bitterness, nor to create animosity. We are not enemies of our Roman Catholic citizens. We are here to express gratitude for our heritage.
Well, the Orange Order were powerful. Yeah, the Orange Order, the Masonic Lodge, controlled the city jobs. There was no way you could get a job in the city hall if you didn't belong to the Orange Order and the Masonic Lodge, or both.
Toronto was a good city, a city of churches, a city that cared for the unfortunate. It was a British city, a Christian city, a Protestant city. It was English and Anglo-Saxon, and I think that's why we call Toronto the Good.
Toronto the Good? Well, that's a lot of crap for Toronto the Good. Protestant was a Protestant city. Let's not kid ourselves. The Catholics and the Jews were secondary.
Jews and Italians, the largest minorities in this colonial city, together formed less than 10% of the population. These communities spoke European mother tongues and lived side by side in the busy, crowded downtown area extending from Spadina Avenue and up to Christie Pits.
There were certain areas of the city where, say, it was Anglo-Saxon, and if someone tried to move in, the neighbors made it abundantly clear that they didn't want them there.
In a bid to maintain Canada's British character after waves of immigration, the government had begun restricting the entry of non-British newcomers.
My parents came from Poland, and there was terrible anti-Semitism there.
Most people in those days came to get away from the persecutions, the pogroms, and the possibility of having a better life.
It was supposed to be the land of milk and honey. Not only that, it is. I consider it the best city in the best country in the world.
So we came to the promised land, and everybody said the streets are paved with gold.
All right, I'll put it bluntly. If you were Anglo and Orange, Toronto was very good for you at that particular time. Being put in the opposite area, if you were part of the ethnic groups, there was discrimination. You didn't have the same opportunities that others had.
When you come to Canada, they make you realize this is who you are, and you gotta remember that.
Desperate for work, immigrants and Jews took the most menial jobs. They had few options since they encountered quotas at the universities and were cold-shouldered by the professions.
It was very hard for a Jew to get into the University of Toronto. It was hard for a Jew to be a doctor, hard for a Jew to be a lawyer.
You could see it right in the newspaper with Jews not to apply.
Here you had two minorities. The Italians had the same problem we had.
I remember when we had snowfalls as a kid, I would take a snow shovel and then go up into the ritzy areas, and I saw a man, you could tell he was a businessman, real English style, and he took one look at me, he says, "Hey son, this is not your area. Get back south of the tracks where you belong." And he just turned me around and headed me down the street.
So a lot of anti-Semitism resulted in those times, especially the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, as they were called. They would take it out on the foreign people.
I came from downtown, and I was just a youngster, and he called me a dirty Jew, and I says, "Gee, hi, Wash, why is he calling me a dirty Jew? I didn't know anything about hatred."
We know one thing, that when we were in school, either you were a Dago or a Jew, and that's the way it was. And you had no alternative but to take it, otherwise fight back.
Sammy fought back literally and became one of Canada's best boxers, as did his friend and opponent, Frank Genovese. The fight game was one of the few careers open to streetwise Jewish and Italian youths.
When I first come to this country, why people call me Dago man. Long a time ago, they make you feel just like an empty banana. First they called me Tony, you're full of macaroni. Now they call me Wop. Yeah!
Wherever I fought, I'd always hear one guy holler, "Kill that Jew." I heard it in New York, in Toronto, my own hometown. Here I heard it more than anywhere.
It was nothing to go by a golf club or a Gentile club and see no Jews or dogs allowed. That was very prevalent.
Racial discrimination was part of everyday life. But in early March of '33, a Conservative member of the Ontario legislature, Argue Martin, tried to change at least part of that. While he could do little to stop people excluding racial groups from jobs or property, he tried to make racist signs and advertisements illegal.
I submit that it is the duty of the legislature to do what it can in the interests of harmony.
The bill was defended by E.F. Singer, Conservative member and a leader in the city's Jewish community. He'd overcome the barriers Jews faced in the professions to become a distinguished lawyer.
Is it safe to allow signs to be posted on or near public highways reading "Jews and dogs not admitted"?
Of the situations the Honorable Mr. Singer reports, I have no knowledge. If such exist, they are few and far between.
The bill was opposed by Wilfred Hyington, also a Conservative.
And British fair play, which still predominates in the minds of the great mass of people in this country, can be depended on to deal with.
Didn't they used to have a better saying than that? British fair play, kick him when he's down.
As far as I can see, the instances of public advertising complained of by Mr. Singer represent merely bad manners. And as everybody knows, people cannot be legislated into good manners.
Such discrimination leads to strife, and it is not in the interests of good government. It might start a riot.
Argue Martin's bill failed, and the signs stayed up. But his warning was to be fulfilled before the year was out, because of events that were unfolding that spring in Germany. Hitler was heralded to power by the Great Depression, which had swept the world for 4 years. A third of Toronto's workforce was unemployed. The figure cut through racial boundaries, but immigrants, already shunted aside, were hit especially hard.
Everybody was in the shithouse, and that's exactly the way it was. It was hard to believe.
It was a tough time. Are you kidding? It was so tough there. People were getting 15, 20, and 25 cents an hour, and a lot of people couldn't get jobs.
There was no cash welfare in those days. All you got was turnips and parsnips. And of course, people were literally starving.
The dire times increased the appeal of radical movements, which had sprung up in Eastern Europe. In the mind of the British establishment, Jewish immigrants dominated the radical groups, but statistics didn't support that. Police Chief Draper, suspicious of immigrants and dead set against communists, considered them one and the same.
All immigrants are not communists, but all communists are immigrants.
First of all, Draper wasn't any higher than this counter. He's always too short to be a policeman. But he was sent down to be the chief of police, and of course, he got in with the businessmen and the other big tycoons that ran Toronto in those days who were violently anti-communist, mostly anti-labor union, really, but the communism would come into it too. And Draper, of course, would do anything they wanted done.
The police, you might say, were more like a military extension run on the British line.
Draper formed a Red Squad to keep a close eye on trade unionists and their supporters.
The speakers would gather in Queen's Park and talk to the unemployed. And some of the people were just out of work and they were just airing themselves when Draper's dragoons his mounted squad would rush into Queen's Park with their batons flying.
Through May and June of '33, barely a week passed without a downtown park becoming a battleground, as citizens demonstrating for better working and living conditions met the full force of Draper's Dragoons.
It was nothing. If you went into Queen's Park and you wanted to speak, you could be beaten up, you could be dragged off the podium, you could be arrested. So happened my husband was beaten up rather badly, and the person that was with him was terribly beaten up. My husband only lost a few teeth, but that was bad enough. But anybody else who tried to talk about what was happening in the country, the depression, the fact that people were starving, obviously there it was possible to have no free speech. They said none.
Hereafter, all speeches and proceedings held at public meetings will be conducted in the English language, and no disorderly or seditious reflections on our form of government, or the king, or any constituted authority will be allowed.
While Hitler had obliterated free speech in Germany, in Toronto newspapers throughout spring and summer, reports appeared of the Nazis' intentions towards the Jews. The most vivid accounts were by the Toronto Star's Pierre Van Passen.
There is no precedent for the terror being waged in Germany today, perpetrated on defenseless human beings by fiendish bands of Nazism. I've interviewed scores of refugees. I've seen wounds that would nauseate the most stout-hearted of surgeons. 115,000 people have been arrested since the election. Not a single trial has been held. But the hideously mutilated bodies, rendered unrecognizable by the long knives of Nazism, can be found everywhere. The massacre promised long ago by Hitler and his chieftains has become a ghastly reality.
In early 1933, it was already clear what the Nazi swastika represented.
Stories written in the Star by Pierre Van Passen, the famous war correspondent, Star writer at that time, told of the horrors the Hitler regime were inflicting against the Jews in Germany. Things that the German people themselves didn't even know about because the censorship was then in vogue in Germany.
As more and more reports appeared, anxiety in Toronto's Jewish community increased. In July, the day before the Orange Day parade, 15,000 marched from Spadina Avenue to the Queen's Park Cenotaph in sympathy with Nazi victims.
Well, my dad, he couldn't read English, but he read the Jewish paper. And of course, that was full every day with the news from Germany that Hitler was taking power and the terrible things that were happening to the Jews out there.
A letter published in the Toronto Telegram was not so sympathetic. If the Jews of Germany encouraged disloyal parades of the kind witnessed here on Tuesday, is it any wonder that Hitler planted his iron heel on their necks? You can't expect but a grunt from a pig. But we will not see our war memorials desecrated.
4 men pounced on this man. They were beating him in the face. Every blow brought blood. And then his attackers fled. 4 brown shirts. Nazis. The unconscious man's face was barely recognizable. A German policeman walked up. "Who is this?" he asked. "A Jew," somebody replied. "That's the way they should all be treated," somebody in the crowd said. And then a tall, well-dressed Negro pushed his way to the prostrate man. "This here man is going to die soon if we don't get him to the hospital," said the Negro. A taxi cab came up. The driver refused to take the charge. "Too dirty," he said. The Negro threw off his coat and wrapped the wounded man in it. "I will take him in my lap," he offered. As we drove to the hospital, the Negro said to me, "This am a civilized country, boy. Watch your step." When we arrived at the hospital, we were told that we were carrying a dead man.
Van Passen was briefly detained by the Gestapo, and the Star was banned in Germany, but the reports persisted in Toronto.
No fire is as easily kindled as that of anti-Semitism. Fire may be dormant in Canada, but the spark is still there. Germany is not the only place with prejudice.
Thousands of miles from Nazi Germany, Hitler's influence succeeded in reaching Toronto the Good's most British neighbourhood. While the swastika triggered fear and revulsion among Toronto's Jews, there were some in the city who embraced it. The Beaches, a village-like neighbourhood on the shores of Lake Ontario at the eastern edge of the city, had a 93% British population. The Balmy Beach Canoe Club was a typical centre of social activity. During the hot summer of '33, immigrant families from downtown flocked to the lakeshore's public parks.
There were only so many places that you could go in the summertime, as you financially couldn't go to camps. So you ended up at the beach or Sunnyside and get away from the hot summer.
All my friends, in a hurry to get into the pool, got in before I did. When it came my turn, the burly operator of the turnstile, he said, "Hey, son, you can't come in here." And I said, "Why not?" And he pointed to a sign right above the turnstile that said, "Gentiles only." So I said, "Well, what's that got to do with me?" He says, "No Jews allowed in here." I said, "Well, I'm not Jewish, I'm Italian." Very proudly, you know, I said, "I'm Italian." He says, "Same thing, get the hell out." And he kicked me out.
A letter writer to the Parks Department expressed the rising concern of Beaches residents about the influx of visitors who were wrongly perceived as all being Jewish. Do you think it possible to place a few picnic tables in Kew Beach Park in an area marked for Gentiles only? At present, the Jewish people seem to get every table in the park, and even if there were room, one would hardly like to sit with them. I have seen Jewish people strip their children and dry them. Now, who would want to sit and eat at a table with that? In late July, a movement was born, the Swastika Club. The driving forces were Bert Ganter, co-owner of a local confectionery store, and his youthful sidekick, Harold McKay.
Residents, young and old alike, are not a little perturbed at the recent influx of obnoxious visitors to Kew Gardens and the surrounding territory every Saturday and Sunday. Right, yeah. Well, local number 5 of the Swastika Club has formed in Kew Beach. Its sole object is to maintain the beauty of the neighborhood for its members who are residents and taxpayers.
Some of the beach residents told the Jews who were coming down there for picnics not to come, and had beaten them up to try to drive them out of the beaches.
You'll see our members on the beaches, on the boardwalks, and in Kew Gardens wearing a nickel-plated badge with a scarlet swastika thereon. They'll simply wear the emblem. We feel the emblem will give the desired effect.
We want you to keep the lawns and the flower beds free from litter of all kinds. Please, wear your badge whenever you're on the boardwalk, in Kew Gardens, or in any other of the affected areas.
Do you have the courage to indicate your disapproval? If so, join the Swastika Club.
Yeah, okay, I'll join.
Jewish leaders expressing outrage at the flaunting of the swastika were joined in protest by other community spokesmen. Ganter, who had first refused to be identified in the press, soon made exaggerated claims that there were 400 members, about 10 times more than the reality. Mayor Stewart tried to soothe all parties.
Heil Hitler!
I talked to a man yesterday, truly a gentleman, who told me that in England, no one throws paper on the street, not the smallest wrapper. People holding picnics in the interests of health and a clean city should not litter the streets and parks with paper wrappings or foodstuffs. And picnic parties in truckloads, I understand, are against the law. As far as Mr. Hitler is concerned, I think these young men would do well to emulate British examples instead of going out of the empire. It is up to every section of the population, Jew and Gentile, irrespective of race, color, or creed, to appreciate the opportunities afforded us in this great city.
The mayor's appeal had no effect. The Swastika Club actually increased their parades along the boardwalk.
And of course, as soon as the Jews saw the signs that they weren't wanted, then more of them than ever came down.
Along the boardwalk there were signs, the same signs that were up on Lakeshore Road. No Jews, no dogs allowed. We tore them down, and if somebody said something about anything, then we had a fight.
The Swazis, as they'd been dubbed by Toronto's press, declared that they would mass their forces on the civic holiday, August the 9th. Thousands of visitors from downtown were expected. The Nazi symbol was displayed all over the beaches.
Come to reign over us, God save the King.
Any demonstration that might cause ill feelings would be regrettable on civic holiday, or any other time.
Disregarding the mayor's plea, Ganter and Mackay marched down the boardwalk to confront the Jewish visitors.
If anybody tries to stop me, tries to make trouble, tries to take this badge away from me, I'll ask him just what he thinks this club stands for. And if he'll talk reasonably, then I'll try and convince him that it's not anti-Jewish, like a lot of people try to make out. If he's just a roughneck looking for trouble, then I'll let him take a sock.
Number 10 police station looked after this area, and the inspector at that time was a fellow by the name of Hans Majuri. And if he's seen anybody wearing a swastika, he'd rip their shirt right off their back. It was just like a bull if you seen red.
You're not leaving here until you take those signs off. I'm not gonna have a riot on account of a couple of lousy shirts.
Well, I guess we're here till morning.
Where's our gang? Do you want to see the rest of my gang?
Get a hold of yourself, okay?
Your actions might threaten the safety of women and children.
Well, if it's for the women and children, for the sake of them, then...
Majuri's actions diffused the confrontation that weekend. Attempting to resolve the conflict, Mayor Stewart called Swastika Club representatives, Beaches residents, and Jewish leaders to a meeting at City Hall.
I'm not going to give an order. I can't do this. But I am suggesting that you seriously consider if it is in the best interest of the city if you use this emblem.
The Balmy Beach area was once a camping ground for the Iroquois Indian, for whom the swastika was a good luck sign. Our salute is taken from the Iroquois. It's a peaceful greeting. It means, hoya, pal.
Hoya, pal.
Ganter could not deny the power of the swastika. Offended Jewish leaders, embarrassed Beaches residents, and Mayor Stewart, in the interests of public order, negotiated a climb down by Ganter. The Swastika Club disbanded. It was replaced by the Beaches Protective Association, whose declared purpose was the beautification of the neighborhood.
And we have absolutely nothing to do with fascists, Nazis, or other anti-Semitic ideas.
The thing is, he seemed like the nicest man. We were talking about the groups that we like and everything. And then later on, as conversation got deeper, I noticed that he had like tattoos of swastikas on him. And I said, "What's this for?" He said, "I'm a member of the Nazi Party of Canada."
Although by the 13th of August, it appeared that the Jewish community would be spared the indignity of seeing the swastika flaunted in the beaches, worse was yet to come. Just a few days later, the swastika was to reappear on the west side of the city, at a popular baseball park in an old quarry site known to the locals as Christie Pits.
It was a neighborhood founded by the people from the British Isles. There was a mixture of Italian people moved in there, Irish Catholics and Irish Protestants, and there was a lot of Jewish people who began to move north towards Christie Pits.
Local gangs each claimed their own territory, most notoriously the Pitt Gang, who were chiefly Anglo-Protestant.
Oh, I got in fights regularly. Remember, I lived in an area where there were a lot of fights. The Christie Pits area was an area where the different groups did mix. Then you could be physically attacked.
Nevertheless, baseball games attracted thousands from the neighborhood to the pits. The rivalry between the league teams was fierce. In August 1933, in the keenly anticipated playoffs, St. Peter's were to meet the Harvard Playground team. St. Peter's represented a Catholic church near the pits. From a few blocks south of the park, the Harvard team was principally Jewish. Star players were well known locally in this popular Depression-era sport. The Harvard catcher in that series was Irv Lasky.
Baseball meant everything to me. I loved it, and I still do.
But as well as regular ball fans, the first playoff of '33 attracted those looking for trouble.
In 1933, at the peak of the Depression, no one had any money to go anywhere else. And when there was a major game like this was, a good softball game, it filled the hill.
The Pit Gang and Beach's troublemakers came along, not to support St. Peter's, but to oppose Harvard.
It just started between this gang of agitators, led by a guy called Skinny Adams. Just an unemployed youth and one of those smart aleck type, not too intelligent.
As the game heated up, the teams were tied going into the 10th inning. When the Harvard player came up to bat, part of the crowd began to taunt him. Adams had brought a rolled-up sweater held in his lap.
Agitators dared him to wave that sweater, knowing that on the hill, a lot of Jewish people were watching this team.
Skinny Adams pulled out a crude swastika flag.
And he started to wave it.
As the swastika was unfurled, Nicky Bachner was at bat.
But the swastika failed to intimidate the Harvard player at bat.
He got a hit, and the run came in. We won the ball game, and that was the end of the... We all scattered after that.
The Harvard fans hadn't risen to the bait. They felt vindicated by their team's victory, and the tension was, for the moment, dispelled. But they made no secret of the fact that they'd be back in full force for the next game. Sometime later that night, members of the Pit Gang crept to the middle of Christie Pitts Park, climbed on top of the clubhouse, and defiantly painted a swastika on the roof.
What I recall, we were told beforehand there was going to be trouble, that there was trouble brewing.
There was going to be a little bit of racial discrimination of some sort, fights of some sort, so a whole bunch of us come down.
Just over a week after the tension of the civic holiday, again Jewish leaders pleaded for calm in their community. Mayor Stewart, anxious about trouble brewing for the second game, sent a warning to General Draper. But instead, Draper sent his dragoons to another park to police a small rally of the unemployed. With 10,000 watching, St. Peter's started off the second game well.
We were on one side of the hill, the ball game was going on.
And the Pitts gang, basically, were on the third base side.
First part of the game was absolutely normal until there was sort of a rumbling.
Across the other side of the hill, there was a few guys that were very boisterous and loud, demanding to clobber the Jews.
Before I knew it, I heard the word Jew and Heil.
So the three of us walked over to the other side of the hill and stood right behind them. And when they come out with the dirty Jews, we tapped them on the shoulder and said, "You don't like the Jews, do you?" Bang, and that was it. They toppled down the hill, and that's when the fight started.
Despite clashes throughout the crowd, play continued. As St. Peter's moved to victory, their fans' taunts grew more aggressive. Then, when St. Peter's won, the Pit Gang and their supporters brought the summer evening's entertainment to an ugly turning point. The animosity that had been building through the summer was finally vented. With one action, they changed the face of the city. Above the game, on high ground beyond the baseball diamond, they summoned the power of the swastika. The outraged cries of the Jews in the crowd could be heard from blocks away.
The big white blanket was unfurled, around 8 feet high and 8 feet wide.
Heil Hitler, they yell. Heil Hitler was like the swastika.
Everybody made a dash for the thing.
The Jewish fellas come running down the hill and they started confronting the Nazis that had raised the flag.
And in no time at all, there was a fight.
When the Jewish fellows came at them, they had lost their bravery and started running.
Now we run after them, baseball bats and everything, and we really give it to them, but good.
As night fell, people battled to capture the swastika flag. Fighting intensified. By the time the alarm was raised, the riot was underway, hopelessly beyond the control of the 6 police officers on duty.
Everybody was fighting. One on to another, didn't even know who they were fighting, what it was about, and what anything was.
A rumor spread like wildfire that a Jewish boy had been killed. Messengers sped south to the pool halls and cafes along Spadina and College.
Somebody came with a truck and said, "Hey guys, we got to go up to the Christie Pits. They're beating the hell out of the Jewish guys."
And everybody could grab whatever they could grab, a pool stick. Of course, it was hell-bent for leather once we saw what was happening when we got there.
There was blood spilled all over the place.
But I knocked the guy down, he would kick him. We were like a team.
When you were in a spot like that, you didn't box, you kicked, you did everything that you could do to stay alive.
Previous to this, the Nazis always ended up outnumbering whoever it was that they were attacking. Here, at last, it was an equal amount, and they were getting the shit knocked out of them, being perfectly honest.
I got into the fray thinking that I could scare somebody. I was about maybe 8 years old, you know. I didn't scare anybody.
Finally, police reinforcements arrived and struggled to restore order.
The surprising thing to me about the swastika riots, as I remember it, was the number of people that were not involved actually in the baseball game, but came out of their houses in that area when they heard about it with bats and sticks because they were after the Jews. And some of them were not actually hoodlums, respectable residents.
One of the Nazis came into the store. He was calling for reinforcements. My dad grabbed his arm and he broke it, as a matter of fact, and the guy passed out. And my dad was a very placid, quiet man. And I never knew he was that strong. Anyway, he just took the guy, took him out the front door, left him there, and went back in the store and sat down.
The policemen weren't in favor of the Jews, even at the fight. They'd grab me and move along, you little Jew bastard, and then they grabbed me and took me to the station. They pushed me away from the action 3 times. They took me away twice. 3rd time, they took me to the station and whacked me around.
Waves of police reinforcements were countered with waves of more rioters. For hours they fought. It was not until well after midnight, at least 6 hours after it began, that the park was clear. But for several more hours, fights continued on neighboring street corners and in alleyways. By the end of the night, the swastika flag, which had been so brazenly flaunted, lay trampled and shredded by angry Jews and their friends, lashing back at one insult too many. The next morning, the citizens of Toronto woke to a new image of their city. Mayor Stewart, shocked by the breakdown of public order, called General Draper to task.
Did not the Parks Department, at my request, convey to you a message that the baseball game was going to take place and would merit special attention?
There was nothing in that message to suggest any danger of rioting taking place.
You read the newspaper that there were Jewish hooligans that started the whole thing.
Were there 100 persons on Spadina Avenue not intercepted?
We could not anticipate any of them taking part in any riot.
Even the police, at the time, seemed to turn the story around.
Were lead pipe, bats, broom handles displayed in any manner to indicate that the peace was about to be disturbed?
That matter will be investigated.
The commission will see that an answer is given, and reasons will have to be presented. At what time did the reinforcements arrive in the park?
There was no delay from the time the alarm was raised.
What is being done about these swastika organizations?
The Dominion, provincial, and city police have the matter well in hand, and at this time are in possession of information as to the activities of this and kindred organizations.
Why can so many police be marshaled to suppress the communists and not the swastika clubs?
I am not prepared to make any public statement as to the disposition of my men.
And 3 of the 4 newspapers opposed Draper. They wrote editorials against him, but he had so many business people behind him, and they reached into the government that they preserved his job, and he lasted 18 years.
Mayor Stewart finally banned the swastika from public display, to the relief of the Jewish community.
From recent occurrences in our city, it is apparent that the display in any form of the swastika emblem is provocative and tends to incite riotous conduct and a disturbance of the peace, which is not at all in keeping with the good name of our city. I therefore warn all citizens that the use of this swastika emblem will render the person so using same liable to the full prosecution of the law. Peace, order, and good government is my desire.
Since then, the city has never experienced civil disturbance on the scale of that at Christie Pitts.
I think the Christie Pits has a place in that Toronto growing up and coming of age, because we did come of age. People stood up for right against wrong.
It meant an awful lot. It meant that leave me alone. I'm going to fight back.
And there was a restraint on the attitude of the people towards Jewish people, and the city council did act very fast, and a lot of people were ashamed, even some of those that took part in the riot.
Respectability and good order quickly returned to Toronto. But the riot reinforced a fear of racial unrest and an anti-Semitism that reached the highest level of government. From 1933 to the end of the war, Jews fleeing Nazi Germany were almost all denied entry to Canada. Some were turned back to perish in the concentration camps. Shame over the riot at Christie Pitts had been buried and forgotten. Over 60 years after the swastika gangs paraded along the beaches, the small Jewish community at the neighborhood synagogue feels free to show a higher profile than it did then.
Today we are celebrating our 75th anniversary. One of our members said, "Well, do you think we need the police here?" And I said, "Why?" "Well, maybe there might be a few." I said, "Well, if they are, we'll deal with it." But I don't expect it. I am an optimist.
The Orange Order has long lost its stranglehold on the running of Toronto. It is no longer even a major presence in what has become one of the world's great multiracial cities.
In the 30s, the parades were large, and many a time we stood for 2.5 hours to see these parades go by and how we enjoyed them.
We can't appeal to the new immigrants that are coming here because they're not familiar with British traditions or how Canada is governed, or they don't know anything about the monarchy.
Christie Pitts is still a park where baseball games are played and people gather. The young Jews and Italians have long since moved on from the pits and have been replaced by a new generation of immigrants.
We're just Latin Americans. We're all like Latinos, you know. The police seem to take that like that's the only way they see us. Like they don't see us as normal teenagers. They just see us as bad crooks or whatever because they want us to leave here. But I don't think now it's too late that we're here.
There were some people who were discriminated against, there's no doubt about that. But, I mean, what's new? I mean, they're still doing it to some degree today.
In 1992, a mile west of Christie Pitts, a young black man was shot and killed by police. Angry crowds swarmed and looted Toronto's main street. Again, the city was forced to reconsider its image.
The Christie Pit riot happened, and we think that we would learn of it and not repeat it, but that riot happened on Yonge Street, so it shows us that we don't really learn from our past experiences, and that progress is an illusion.
Last week, Friday night, between the hours of 8 and 11:30, some person unknown to us came and spray painted 2 black swastikas on the front doors.
Today, Toronto remains a beacon of hope to immigrants around the world. A recent mayor of the city has said, Toronto is home to more than 120 distinct cultures, and more than 100 languages are spoken here. In many ways, we are the world in microcosm, and we are the future.
But to believe that there won't be any racism in the near future is like believing in the tooth fairy.
I do think that it's important to be optimistic, first of all, to recognize what the issues are, to educate ourselves. I have faith in the world, I have faith in Canada, definitely, that eventually, it might be hundreds of years, it might be thousands of years, but I think that one day there won't be anything as anti-Semitism or any other kinds of racism in the world.
There's many things in the past that we thought would never change that have changed. So my feeling is there is hope.
We, the future generation, are educated about racism, and the school I go to, we're a mix and blend, and we can relate to other cultures now, and yet there's always be someone out there that's going to say, this is who you are, and you're different from this person, so I don't think it will ever go away.